In 47 years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has had exactly two supreme leaders, two men, two visions, two iron grips on one of the most strategically powerful nations on earth. The first died in his bed after a decade of revolutionary rule, leaving behind a state still burning with the fever of its own creation. The second ruled for 36 years, longer than most people's entire careers, until the morning of February 28, 2026, when a precision airstrike ended the longest unbroken reign in the Middle East. In the hours that followed, the world held its breath. Because what happens next in Iran does not just affect Iran. It affects oil prices. It affects nuclear weapons programs. It affects the balance of power across an entire region that has been at the center of global conflict for decades. And history, if you know where to look, has already written the answer. Every transition of power in Iran has followed a pattern of chaos and consolidation, of unexpected successors and unexpected betrayals, of revolutions that eat their own children, of men who reach absolute power and the forces that eventually bring them down. This is the story of every Iranian supreme leader, what they built, how they fell, and what the wreckage tells us about what comes next. To understand the supreme leaders, you first have to understand what they replaced. For centuries, Iran was a monarchy, ancient, proud, and deeply rooted in Persian civilization that predated Islam itself. By the 20th century, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a Western-backed king who modernized Iran rapidly but ruled with increasing authoritarianism. He had the full support of the United States. His secret police, the SAVAK, were trained by the CIA and were feared throughout the country. Dissidents were tortured. Opposition was crushed. The gap between a westernized elite and a deeply religious population grew wider every year. By the late 1970s, Iran was sitting on a fault line. On one side, a king who believed he was modernizing his nation. On the other, millions of people who believed he was destroying their soul. The man who channeled that rage into a revolution was a 76-year-old cleric who had spent years in exile. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini, and what he created had never existed before in human history. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran on February 1, 1979. He had been in exile for 15 years. The crowds that greeted him numbered in the millions. Within 10 days, the Shah's government had collapsed. Within months, one of the most dramatic political transformations in modern history was complete. Iran was no longer a monarchy. It was the world's first Islamic Republic, a theocratic state governed not by democratic law, but by the principle of Velayat-e-Faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. In simple terms, a senior Islamic scholar would hold ultimate authority over every branch of government, above the president, above parliament, above the courts. This position, the supreme leader, was held by one man, Khomeini. What followed was a decade of extraordinary turbulence. A hostage crisis that held 52 Americans for 444 days, humiliating the United States on the world stage. A brutal 8-year war with Iraq, a war that killed hundreds of thousands and ended without a clear victor. A wave of executions of political opponents that shocked even many revolutionaries. And through all of it, Khomeini's authority was absolute. He was not merely a political leader. He was a religious symbol, a revolutionary icon, the embodiment of the Islamic Republic itself. When he died on June 3, 1989, of heart failure at the age of 86, the scenes of public mourning were unlike anything the world had seen. Millions flooded the streets. People tore their own clothes in grief. The funeral crowd was so massive that Khomeini's body nearly fell from the open coffin. He had ruled for a decade. He died in his bed. He left behind a state that was both his greatest creation and his most dangerous inheritance. because the question of who would follow him had nearly torn the revolution apart before he was even gone. This is the part of Iranian history that most people have never heard. The story of how power passed from Khomeini to Khomeini is not a story of smooth succession. It is a story of betrayal, constitutional manipulation, and a last-minute decision that changed the course of history. Khomeini's chosen successor was a man named Hussein Ali Montazeri. Montazeri was a senior cleric, a genuine scholar, a man with the religious credentials the Constitution required. For years, he was being groomed to take over. Then, months before Khomeini's death, Montazeri made a fatal mistake. He criticized the mass execution of political prisoners that was taking place across Iran. He questioned the scale of the killings. He questioned the justice of it. In a revolutionary state built on absolute loyalty, questioning the revolution was the same as betraying it. Khomeini removed Montazeri from the line of succession immediately. And with weeks remaining in his life, Khomeini needed a new successor fast. The man he chose, Ali Khomeini, was by all accounts not an obvious choice. He was the president at the time, but he was not a senior cleric. He did not hold the rank of Ayatollah. He did not have the religious credentials that the Iranian constitution required for a supreme leader, so the constitution was changed, literally rewritten in the final weeks of Khomeini's life, to remove the requirement for senior religious rank. And when Khomeini died, a man who had described his own nomination as something that should make us all cry tears of blood, became the supreme leader of Iran. He was not chosen because he was the most qualified. He was chosen because he was loyal, because he was controllable, because in a moment of crisis, he was available. History has a habit of producing leaders this way. Not the most deserving, the most convenient. And what Khomeini did with that convenience would define the next 36 years. What Ali Khomeini lacked in religious authority, he compensated for in political ruthlessness. In the early years, many senior clerics did not take him seriously. They considered him a political appointment, not a genuine religious authority. Khomeini's response was to systematically dismantle every center of power that was not loyal to him. He used the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, as his personal enforcement mechanism. Over time, he expanded their role from military force to economic powerhouse, giving them control over vast sectors of the Iranian economy, which gave them a reason, financial as well as ideological, to remain loyal. He controlled the judiciary. He controlled state media. He controlled who could run for office through the Guardian Council, a body that could simply disqualify any candidate he found inconvenient. Elections happened in Iran, but they happened within walls that Khomeini had built. He survived the Green Movement of 2009, when millions protested a disputed election result by using the IRGC and Basij forces to crush the uprising. He survived the Masa Amini protests of 2022, when a young woman died in morality police custody and women across. Iran burned their hijabs in open defiance by using the same brutal suppression. He survived economic collapse, international sanctions, assassination attempts, multiple rounds of protests. For 36 years, he held. But Khomeini understood something that every long-ruling leader eventually learns: that absolute power creates absolute enemies, and that the longer you rule, the longer the list of people who are waiting for you to fall. On February 28, 2026, that list included the most powerful military alliance on Earth. The strike that killed Khomeini was not a spontaneous decision. It was the product of months of intelligence work, precise, patient, and extraordinarily penetrating. Khomeini was 86 years old. His health had been declining for years. He was operating from hardened, secure locations. The strike found him anyway. In the hours after the assassination, Iranian state media went silent. Then came conflicting reports. Then, confirmation. The longest-serving head of state in the Middle East was dead. Iran's constitution immediately activated Article 111, the Emergency Succession Protocol. An interim leadership council took control, composed of the president, the head of the judiciary, the Speaker of Parliament, and a senior cleric named Alarza Arafi. Simultaneously, Iran launched retaliatory strikes against multiple targets. The chain of command, despite the assassination of Khamenei and several senior IRGC commanders, had not broken, which told the world something important. That what Khamenei built over 36 years, the institutional structure, the Revolutionary Guard networks, the layered command systems, did not die with him. This is the lesson every student of history learns about revolutionary states. They are harder to kill than their leaders. Here is where history becomes genuinely instructive, because Iran has been in this position before. Not exactly this position, but the position of sudden power transition in a revolutionary theocratic state. And the patterns that emerged in 1989 contain powerful lessons for 2026. Lesson 1. The successor will not be who you expect in 1989. Nobody expected Khamenei. He was not the most qualified. He was not the most powerful. He was not the people's choice. He was the establishment's safe option, chosen in a moment of panic by a system that needed stability more than it needed legitimacy. In 2026, the same dynamic applies. The obvious names, Mojtaba Khamenei, Ayatollah Khomeini's grandson, senior hardline clerics, may all be too controversial, too powerful, or too independent to be acceptable to the full establishment. History suggests the successor will be someone who appears manageable, who appears controllable, who poses no immediate threat to the existing power structure, and who will then, like Khamenei before him, spend years consolidating power in ways nobody anticipated. Lesson 2. The IRGC will determine the outcome. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just a military force. It is the backbone of the Islamic Republic. It controls vast economic interests. It has its own intelligence apparatus. It has loyalties that run deeper than loyalty to any individual leader. In 1989, Khamenei survived because the IRGC chose to support him. In 2026, whoever the IRGC supports will become the next supreme leader. This is not a democratic principle. It is a geopolitical reality. The question is not who the Assembly of Experts elects. The question is who the IRGC backs. Those two answers may be the same. They may not be. Lesson 3. External pressure creates internal unity. Every time Iran has faced serious external military pressure, the 198 or 198, Iran-Iraq War, the 2019 to 2020 assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian political establishment has responded by closing ranks. Divisions that existed before the external threat temporarily disappear. A common enemy is the most powerful unifying force in political history. The American and Israeli strikes of February 2026 have provided the Iranian establishment with precisely that common enemy. This does not mean the Islamic Republic is stable. It means the instability will take longer to surface than outside observers expect. The three scenarios. Analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations have identified three possible trajectories. The first, regime continuity. A new supreme leader is chosen. The IRGC remains dominant. The Islamic Republic continues, harder, more paranoid, and more isolated than before. The second, military takeover. The IRGC, strengthened by the crisis, moves from kingmaker to king. Iran becomes a military state with religious decorations. The third, regime collapse. The combination of assassination, military strikes, economic devastation, and internal division proves too much for the system to absorb. Iran fractures. Different factions control different regions. The Islamic Republic, as a unified state, ceases to exist. History strongly suggests the first scenario. Revolutionary states are extraordinarily resilient. They were built for exactly this kind of pressure. They have survived it before. But history also tells us that every prediction about Iran has eventually been proven wrong. Step back further. Look at the longer pattern. Every supreme leader leaves behind not just a political legacy, but a structural one. Khomeini left behind the concept, the idea that a cleric could and should hold absolute political power. He invented the office. He defined its spiritual authority. He established its revolutionary legitimacy. Khomeini left behind the infrastructure, the IRGC networks, the economic empire, the intelligence apparatus, the system of institutional loyalty that kept the republic standing through every storm. What the next supreme leader will inherit is not just a title. It is 47 years of accumulated institutional power, built by two men who understood that the survival of a revolution depends not on its ideology, but on its ability to make people need it to survive. The Islamic Republic has made millions of Iranians, soldiers, officials, businessmen, clerics, financially and politically dependent on its continued existence. That dependency does not disappear when the leader dies. It becomes the most powerful argument for continuity. This is what history tells us about what comes next. Not necessarily peace, not necessarily democracy, not necessarily a better Iran, but continuity of a system that has survived everything thrown at it for 47 years. And that will use this moment, like every moment before it, to make itself harder to destroy. Two supreme leaders, 47 years, one revolutionary state. The first died in his bed, mourned by millions who believed the revolution would outlive them all. The second died in a bunker, under the most powerful weapons ever deployed against a single man, in a war that reshaped the definition of power in the modern world. Both of them, in different ways, succeeded. Not because they were just, not because they were loved, but because they understood the oldest lesson in political history. That power is not something you hold. It is something you build into the institutions, the loyalties, and the dependencies of the people around you. So deeply that when you are gone, the structure remains. And the world, watching from a distance, waits to discover who will fill it next. History does not repeat. But in Iran, in the days and weeks ahead, it will rhyme. Loudly. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of one of the most consequential moments in modern history, subscribe to Historva, because the present always makes more sense when you know the past.